Come closer. Yeah, pull up a little closer to the screen. Just imagine for a second that the glow of this monitor is the very last dying ember of a campfire. And right beyond the edge of your desk, there is absolutely nothing but the freezing absolute dark. Tonight, in this explainer, we're not just looking at cold, hard data. We're stepping straight into a mythic, grim, dark parallel world to dissect a fable of absolute terror. So I need you to listen to me right now, as if I'm an old survivor of the northern wastes, warning you about what's waiting out there in the ice. All right? Let's dive into this dark tale, the legend of the Tallow wife's breath, and the creeping dread of the entity known only as the Boneless.
Listen closely to the old words. Listen, child, to the wind that sounds like a drowning man. You see, what makes this horror so incredibly insidious is its disguise. It doesn't announce itself, you know. There are no monstrous roars, no heavy, thudding footsteps of some giant beast. No, it explicitly mimics extreme winter weather. It hides its hunting tactics in plain sight, disguising itself as howling storms, sudden bone-chilling drops in temperature, and that creeping frost you see on the glass. That frost on your windowsill, it's not merely water. It is a scout. It is the entity itself, looking for a way in.
So what exactly are we dealing with here? Well, in the local, hushed tongues of the north, it's called Benlis Onden, the marrow sucker. And let me be clear, this is absolutely not a creature of flesh and blood. You can't stab it, you can't shoot it. It's a liminal horror, basically a manifested shadow that exists entirely in the spaces between things, right in the cracks of the world. It is literally the personification of despair and existential cold, and it completely thrives when extreme weather thins that fragile barrier between our mundane, safe reality and the malicious forces lurking just on the other side.
To truly understand the scale of this threat, you've got to see the world it inhabits. Imagine a rapid, stark transformation of the landscape right outside your door. The world just drains of color. It leaves behind only these high-contrast blacks and blinding whites, almost like a grim graphic novel coming to life right in front of you. We're talking about the frozen, forsaken barrens. It is a place of total, crushing isolation, where the wind literally cuts through the thickest fur, and the land itself feels completely hostile to absolutely anything with a heartbeat. And as the storm worsens, the environment takes on this uncanny, malicious life of its own. The pine trees here, they don't look like nature anymore. They grow like twisted, black spears thrust violently up from the frozen earth. The air smells strongly of ozone and dead ice. The whole sensory experience of this place is just pure, unadulterated dread. Every single shadow seems to stretch just a little too far, and the cold doesn't just chill your skin, it actually makes your very bones ache with this sudden sinking emptiness. Now this brings us to a fatal clash of realities. Think about human hubris for a second. There was a farmer named Hrolf, and he built a house that was strong and stout. He bragged constantly that his hearth was hot enough to melt winter itself. He sealed his doors with thick iron, and he packed his barn full of warm, prize sheep. I mean, this is the ultimate symbol of human security, right? Structure and wealth. But pitted against it is the liminal horror. And honestly, how futile is physical protection, an iron door or a thick stone wall, against a threat that completely lacks structure? Hrolf laughed at the old tales of the North, fully believing his sturdy walls could keep out a shapeless anti-structural force. But as you can probably guess, Hrolf's arrogant laughter only invited tragedy. You really need to remember this chilling truth. The North does not hear the laughter of men, it only hears the silence of the dying. Because the ultimate horror of the marrow sucker isn't violence, it's silence. It doesn't fight you, it doesn't rage or bang against those heavy iron doors. The entity's approach is marked by an absolute, suffocating quiet that just swallows all sound and all hope. Watch how this builds into the moment of the breach. In the dead of night, the sky held a moon that looked exactly like a splinter of bone. Inside Hrolf's supposedly impenetrable fortress, the roaring hearth fire didn't just blow out from a draft, it was extinguished. Choked out by a sudden heavy pressure descending on the entire room. And the cold that entered wasn't just a rush of winter air. It was a hungry, viscous malice. Through the mortar of the solid stone wall, where a tiny mouse couldn't possibly fit, it came. It looked like spilled tallow, just a pale, rubbery mass flowing entirely without a single sound. It had no face, no eyes, but it knew exactly where the heat was. It flowed silently from the house, moving deliberately toward the warmth of that packed barn. And I really have to ask you, in the stalls, the sheep did not cry out.
How could they? Just pause for a moment and really feel the unbearable helplessness of that. The prize livestock, the literal symbol of Hrolth's security and arrogance, completely paralyzed. There was no panicked bleating, no thrashing hooves, just a silent, terrified waiting as the shapeless mass entered their sanctuary. The horror didn't crush them with teeth or rend them with claws. It poured itself over them like a shroud of thick, gray fog. And the sensory reality of this attack? It is horrifying. There was no struggle at all, only a sickening, dull sound. Imagine the heavy, wet auditory texture of a soaking sack of sand falling into thick mud. Thud, thud, thud. The shapeless horror was molding itself perfectly over the animals, suffocating the entire space in absolute silence. As the darkest hours creep by, this unseen slaughter just unfolds. Right at midnight, that viscous pressure fills the barn, breaching the supposedly unbreachable. By 3 in the morning, the horror does its dark work. It fills the stalls with a pressure so absolute that it actually turns solid bone into gray dust, completely hollowing out the structure of life. And finally at 6, as a cold dawn breaks over the white horizon, Rolf steps outside. He discovers his barn perfectly intact, the iron doors are still locked tight, and his flock is entirely, unnervingly silent. Now at first glance, Hrolf saw his flock looking plump and peaceful, but the gruesome truth lay just beneath the surface. When Hrolf reached out to touch one of his prized sheep, it immediately collapsed. It literally folded in on itself into a heap of hide, wool, and pulverized marrow. The marrow sucker, this ultimate anti-structural force, had consumed the sturdy bones of the animals to reinforce its own amorphous, shadowy existence. It left the wool and skin perfectly untouched, basically creating a hollow mockery of life. And then, the true realization hit him. Hrolf felt a heavy, cold wetness seeping straight into his boots. Looking down, he saw it, a gray, tallow-like smear clinging to the leather. A physical residue of the nightmare that completely defied the laws of God and man. He looked back at his heavy iron doors, the exact ones he proudly locked to keep out the storm, and he realized his fatal mistake. The danger was never the roaring gale outside. The danger was the emptiness that found its way inside. So, what of Hrolf today? Well, his sturdy home is now essentially a tomb. Hrolf lives in total darkness. He never keeps his fire high anymore, no matter how biting the frost gets. He's learned the most terrible lesson of the frozen barrens. Warmth only draws the shapeless hunger right back. So, he deliberately freezes in the dark. He cowers in the corners of his stone house, listening to the walls, just waiting for the silence that has no bones, but breaks all things. Which brings us to the end of our explainer today. Look at me, right through the screen. If you take away anything from the fable of the Benless Onden, let it be this final truth. When the wind sounds like a drowning man, and the cold seems to press heavy against the glass of your window, do not pray for warmth, little one. Pray that you have no shape for the hunger to find.